Hey, it's Chris. Board game news. Let's talk about it. But first, this video brought to you by the Board of Tourism from the planet Hoth. Come there for the weather, stay for the Wampa. Okay. First up, just a Mea Culpa. One of the viewers on my previous video was talking about games I was passing on Kickstarter and getting up at retail. I completely screwed up Sleeping Gods. I'll put that out there. I messed that up. There's an extra expansion thrown in the stretch goals that I just completely missed somehow. So I apologize for that, and I will do my best to not make mistakes like that in the future. So please bear with me, and any grace that you can show me, always appreciated. Let's talk board game news and new stuff that's come out of interest in the last couple weeks. At least I remembered to unpause this week and not completely screw things up. So first up is actually going to be a news announcement from the guy who did Legends of Andor. Legends of Andor has been around for a relatively long time in the board game world, 2013. I know, 7, almost 8 years now. Michael Menzel is coming out with a new game, The Adventures of Robin Hood. And why is this notable? Because Legends of Andor is a relatively well-received, solid game. And it won Kennerspiel in 2013. Sorry, it came out in 2012 originally. And it's Robin Hood. It's the classic tale that goes along with it. The description is still a little bit vague about what the game is actually going to entail. Basically, they say it's a living game board, sort of more of a sandbox type experience where you're Robin Hood and his companions and you're choose your own adventure-esque type game. It's by Cosmos, the same guys who published Legends of Andor in 2012. They also have Harry Potter Hogwarts Battle that's under their belt, Targi, as well as a lot of the Exit games, as well as the most recent, The Crew. So it's coming from a good pedigree across the board, and I'm not sure Robin Hood has really been done up too extensively in the board game scene. I think there's been a couple worker placements that have come out recently. I think there was it a Knizia game that sort of flew under the radar in one of its first sets, Unmatched Robin Hood versus Bigfoot. So its smattering is definitely out there, but its IP just hasn't seen the broad use that a lot of other IPs with its pedigree and longevity have really achieved. So it'll be interesting to see sort of what happens with that and what you can do, especially as the guy who did Legends of Andor. So speaking of Unmatched just announced today that they have some of the Marvel IP, and that's freaking ridiculous. I think there are 4 boxed sets of 3 characters each right now that have been announced so far. And I haven't really been a huge person that's been interested in Unmatched as a 1v1. You know, I like Star Wars Epic Duels right now. I have a copy of that. It's on my trade list for trade because I like other things better. But with the Marvel IP and how successful I've heard from people who really do like that type of game, they've been in translating the mechanics and the uniqueness and the gameplay. I have to admit that it's going to be on my radar as something I will be interested in at least trying out or seeing how different these characters are, because they've done a good way of incorporating the unique characteristics of all of these various legends that they've thrown in the game so far. Like I mentioned, Robin Hood, Bigfoot, Cobble and Fog. The most recent one also being Buffy the Vampire Slayer. I haven't heard much about that, but that's relatively new. So they've really got some big IPs that they're working with, and it's really impressive, and they're doing a good job. And so it's put it back on my radar, and it probably should be on your radar too if you're a Marvel person like I am at all. So it'll be interesting to see how different it is. They've announced all 4 of the games. They've announced all 4 of the titles as well as the characters: Redemption Row, Hell's Kitchen, Teen Spirit, and For King and Country. Redemption Row is Luke Cage, Moon Knight, and Ghost Rider. Hell's Kitchen, if you're familiar with Marvel at all, is the, as expected, Daredevil, Elektra, and Bullseye, sort of the trio that always manages to get together. Team Spirit is Cloak and Dagger, Squirrel Girl, and Miss Marvel. And For King and Country is going to be Black Widow, Black Panther, and Winter Soldier. So you're seeing some tie-in there as well with the MCU from the movie side of things, that either these are characters that are already in movies, or that they've got movies or shows with the recently announced Disney launchings of several of these shows that are going to be coming out in the near future. Or tie-ins. I think Ms. Marvel is going to be in the next Captain Marvel. Moon Knight is getting their own show. Luke Cage, you've already seen. Daredevil, you've already seen. So a lot of these are going to be playing off of the fan base as well. So I'm interested to see what they'll do. Now, with a lot of these videos, you're just listening to me talk and putting up some images up there. So who would notice or care if I happen to be out of focus for, say, 10 or 15 minutes in the middle of the video? That clearly didn't happen, and that's not why I'm recording this at all. So let's talk about the next game news that I think is worthwhile, and that's Pathfinder. Now, normally myself, I'm more of a D&D. You know, I just started playing before the pandemic a game of 5th edition with some of my friends and some of my family, and I'm a little bit more invested in that. But prior to the pandemic, within the last 6 months to a year, the 2nd edition RPG for Pathfinder in the Age of Lost Omens came out. Now, why am I talking about it on a board game channel? Well, it's because they're coming out with a tabletop version of Pathfinder from this same age. So they're trying to play to the crossover. And it's going to be sort of a skirmish, tactical, arena-style game, as the name would suggest. They've announced that it's going to be a crowdfunding Kickstarter-ish campaign in 2021. What we don't know is what exactly it's going to entail. Now, this is more of a campaign that I think will be intriguing for a couple of aspects. Number one is, I would guess that it's going to be heavy miniature based, given the fact that they've decided to go crowdfunding. It's by a company out of Italy, Giochi Utini, that is going to be producing this. And they put up a playthrough video on their personal YouTube channel, which honestly has like 300 views at the time of me making this video. And what it is basically they have this modular board in front of them with tiles that make up a labyrinth. And what you do is you play up to 4 people skirmish, essentially. It's competitive between the monsters and the heroes. You're attempting to get the most glory by the end of the game. Well, how are you going to get this glory? You're going to get this glory by defeating monsters or having monsters beat other heroes. And you cannot control the monsters directly, but what you're going to do, I guess, is you're going to have the ability, as I mentioned with this modular board that's in front of you, is to twist the way that the labyrinth is turning and building so you can force a monster to go towards an opponent instead of you. I don't know. I glanced briefly at the game page on Board Game Geek. I don't think the videos are up there yet. They're on the personal YouTube of the game company. Little snippets of 2-minute, glimpses of what you do here. And I guess it plays over 4 rounds, where each round you're getting more powers, you're leveling up, and the monsters are getting stronger. And so then the dynamic is going to change somehow. More specifics than that, I don't have a clue. But it's worth noting, because all of these people that buy Kickstarters that say, well, you know, if I get a game anyway, that's just extra. And now you have people saying, okay, well, I use them in my D&D, I use them in my role-playing game. Well, this is a direct tie-in. And Pathfinder already has the vast horde of standees and boxes of standees for all of their previous campaigns with version 1, and I don't know if this is going to be sort of a trend for the 2.0 version, or if this is going to be an aberration, or what's going to come of this. So I think it'll be interesting to see. Now, I would say it's direct competitor going straight into the next news. Today, I just saw on Twitter from Monolith, they have announced that the Kickstarter for Mythic Battles Ragnarok is quote-unquote coming soon. So here we go. Here you can see straight from the page, this is one of the new monsters that they're putting out there. This is the Frost Giant. And as you can say, I wasn't kidding, coming soon on Kickstarter. And they talk about there is going to be a new way that they can use this monster, an ability called the Horde. So it appears that they are introducing new abilities and new techniques to give some flavor and variation to this version as opposed to Pantheon. And they actually even go further into say in another tweet that Horde is ability that will allow them to redeploy in original areas for these giants and for creatures. So changing the dynamic of how you're having your troops on the board in the first place. So I'm sure if it's coming to Kickstarter soon, I would be surprised if you don't start to see some preview videos pop up by some of the big names, Board Game Co., Quackalope, whatever, I don't know. So we'll see what comes of that, or who knows? I don't know if they have had a lot of that pre-preview production in many of their other Kickstarter campaigns, apart from the pre-painted miniatures, like in the Batman. So I don't really know what to expect. Maybe they won't. Maybe they'll buck the trend, but we'll see. So there is, Mythic Battles Ragnarok. I'm super intrigued to see what's going to come of that. So going from one Kickstarter to the other, we're going to segue right into this. This is On the Underground. Now, this is a game originally from 2006, the original version was, and it went out of print, and it was highly acclaimed, and it was sought after, and they finally reprinted it like two and a half years ago on Kickstarter for New York and London. And so you've got a double-sided board that you can play, and the self-description is creating routes that you want the laziest passenger ever to use. Because essentially what you're doing is, this is a step up from more of your Ticket to Ride if you're not familiar. You are going to be taking two colors and building routes and putting them optimally between places on the board that the passenger is going to choose to go to. Now the difference is the places that the passenger is going to go to are already relatively known to you, because you have about 4 destinations on the board at any one time, and he or she is going to the nearest location. There can be a quick location and a long location. I forget the exact terminology that they use, but potentially go to 2 different places. And you want to position your tracks so that the passenger, and why they're called the laziest passenger ever on the Board Game Geek page, is they want to walk the least. They don't care if it's the shortest distance, but the passenger does not want to walk. And so if your route allows them to take less steps, they're going to choose your route. And if you can get them on more than one of your route, you're going to get points. If you can connect certain points on the map, you're going to get more points. And so it becomes this little bit of area control almost in a route sense on a board. And they've announced that they are going to be putting out an expansion, standalone expansion of Paris and New York. And I don't really know. There's not a whole lot of other details about what this is going to entail, so I don't know what nuances or what twists are going to be there, because I love the On the Underground, but for me, it's one of those questions, again, same thing with Mythic Battles Pantheon, how much more of a good thing do you need? If I have this and the other, and they're both identical, is it really just a variation between maps? Can I just get the maps? Do I need the whole standalone expansion? Is it going to be like Aeon's End, where I get all the superfluous stuff too that I don't really need? I don't need a 7th, health tracker for the bad guys or for the good guys base, because you put them in all of your standalone expansions. I can't just get the additional stuff. And so I don't know. I would hope more like Ticket to Ride, where they're going to add some small twist. Now, the risk is, because this is such a well-ingrained and well-oiled machine in how it actually works, is it going to be too much? Sort of like if you think of Isle of the Sky, to use that example. Isle of Sky, the first expansion is relatively not well thought of, whereas the second expansion is very well thought of, because the first expansion adds too much. It makes it too nitty-gritty. It takes a very elegant, tight, relatively shorter game and just lengthens it out and makes it too grindy and not enough added depth for the amount of effort needed. Whereas the second just adds more of a good thing. And that's where I think you're going to have to see which one of these this standalone expansion does. Either way, I'm potentially going to be a day one backer, because I think that highly of this game. Now, next up, seeing this image, does that excite you? If this excites you, then you should be really excited to hear this next news. It's sort of flown under the radar. It doesn't even have an entry into Board Game Geek yet. And that is The War of the Rings, the classic, very highly thought of, arguably one of the best 2-player 1v1 strategic tactical games out there, panned by the community. Go look at Shut Up and Sit Down's video review of it if you really want more detail, so I won't go into much more depth. They are making that into a card game. Now, the biggest concern that you may have already, I can hear it in the background going, oh geez, what are they going to do with this? How are they going to change this? How are they going to mess this up? Don't worry. They have already stated that they are going to stay very, very close to the source material. Let's take this back a second. And that game that I was just talking about that is so amazing, so wonderful, why would you ever try and reproduce it in a different form? You know, aren't you, you're just going to mess it up, right? Well, the problem with that game that is so widely thought of as a very, very, very good game and very highly rated to back that up is that the logistics of setting it up in terms of the actual setup, the learning curve in terms of how much you have to know in terms of itty bitty rules and minutia to be able to play it accurately every single time. The fact that you cannot, necessarily, make it a non-lifestyle game because of those reasons, you're not going to be able to remember all of those rules 6 months from now for the most part, if you're like me. And so why is this a good thing? It's because it's trying to distill that essence and that gameplay into a more accessible card game version of it. And if they're able to do that, that is immense. And that makes me super hyped. Because if you're like me and you can't get into the Lord of the Rings LCG as the next best thing to emulate the epicness that is the Lord of the Rings, this might be a nice alternative. So what they're saying is that it could possibly be expanded up to 6 players, and each player is going to have their own unique faction, like I mentioned, the humans, the elves, Sauron's army, whatever it may be. And they're each going to have their each individual strengths and weaknesses that are attributed to them in the first place in the source material. So what they're saying is that in terms of the little amount that's known about the gameplay right now, is that you're going to be advancing each round or trying to on a Fellowship of the Ring journey towards, Mount Doom, obviously. And you are either going to be playing cards to aid that or to the detriment of those trying to advance. There is also going to be a semi-randomness in terms of the sequence of events that happens within the game, of what challenges the game may throw at you. At the same time, like I mentioned earlier, there is not going to be a vast departure from the source material that is going to not be in continuity with it. Now, you may get sequence of events that are slightly skewed, or even just, ABC instead of, ACB, or something along those lines, but they're trying to stay very true to it. The fact that they're already stating those intentions, again, makes it very appealing even to people like me who are not a hardcore, it needs to be exactly the way the source material is type of person. So is that all? No, because at the same time, you're either going to be attacking or defending at various battlefields that line up with the timeline that is going on in the current events, as well as where they are geographically. So there's going to be multiple elements that you're going to have to manage, just like in the other War of the Rings game. If that intrigues you, keep your eyes open. If I hear anything more, I'll be letting you know. Now, the other contrast to this game compared to War of the Rings is primarily thought of as a 2-player game, like I said, but you can play it with 4 people. They have said that this game is going to be designed as a multiplayer experience first, but you could probably play it as a 2-player game as well. So that's another interesting contrast. But again, that does raise the bar in terms of being able to get it to the table as well, having and needing a few more people. So that does sometimes affect the logistics of being able to get it to the table in the first place. They haven't decided exactly when it's going to be available. One of the articles that was talking about this over on Dicebreaker was saying they're contemplating a Kickstarter, but they also say that they're talking about getting it out by the end of 2021. And so if that's going to be out by the end of 2021, that would be probably a very tight timeline unless they come to Kickstarter with significantly advanced production. Unlike a lot of the games that we see nowadays on Kickstarter, one of the few I can think of was the recently Bullet from Level 99 Games, where the turnaround time is 6 months or less. That's relatively uncommon. So I would guess it's probably going to be retail, but it's really intriguing because I've never been able to get a Lord of the Rings game to the table, and I've always wanted to. And so maybe this is the one that will help me do that with a little bit lower overhead that is just more logistically feasible for my group. So I think I'm going to be doing a couple different videos this week as well, just trying some stuff out as well, seeing what fits well, see what doesn't. Some sort of video talking about late backing, a few pledges that are late backing and whether or not you should late back Kickstarters and crowdfunding campaigns that are still available for you to throw your money at in a good way or a bad way. And then I'm also going to be doing, obviously the other biggest news that sort of has got buried in this channel in the first place is ISS Vanguard on GameFound. Now, I've kind of held off on talking about it, and I'll probably hold off on talking about it significantly until I have more information and have a firmer foundation to give you information or my view on. I don't know. I can easily go back and forth on this one. This is probably one that I'm going to have trouble with deciding on. I've heard the criticisms about their other games, and I am torn on their other games. I have not gotten Tainted Grail to the table yet. I have Etherfields coming in the one wave shipping. I've got the new Nemesis coming, and so I'm not concerned as much about two of those three. But the question again, I think it's raised mostly with this one is how many of these campaign games do I need? And I've got 3 or 4 coming, and I think that'll be helped when the pandemic eases up and we are able to get to the table with a group more consistently. But I just can't always justify it. So this one's probably going to be the toughest of them, even though I think it may be honestly more appealing to me than several of the others. At the same time, I think I'm going to try something unique when I actually give it to you. There's plenty of videos out there, and so I'm going to have some of those videos looked at so I can talk a little bit about my concerns, pros and cons in terms of gameplay. But also, I have not looked at the GameFound page since it launched. I have pledged, and that's it. Pledged and walked away right now. I've gotten updates in my email, and I have not looked at those either. And so I thought I would do a video that sort of is a first take. You're getting the first honest impression of what I see and how I feel about it without the ability to script anything for you guys. And so I thought that would be useful, potentially. Maybe not. Maybe that's a horrible concept and people are going to put in the comment section, don't do it, Chris. You're going to be wasting your time, money, and effort. But if that interests you, let me know too. One last thing. Cthulhu Wars. I completely forgot about this. It completely escaped my mind. Cthulhu Wars is now come out with a Duel game from Sandy Peterson. So as a low-cost, low-barrier entry into that realm, I think it's like $30 where you're taking 2 of the old ones and you're just running them head-to-head, sort of a la the Unmatched, like I mentioned at the beginning. The reason and that the lower price point is because they've taken the miniatures away and they've actually used standees. So again, just like the Marvel IP, it'll be interesting to see what sort of foothold this can get in the 1v1 and where it will land in terms of rankings comparatively. You definitely have been having people clamor for simpler versions of games like this that are, $100, $150, $250, $300, where a lot of the money is spent in these massive miniatures. So it'll be interesting to see if people really buy in at a lower amount. Granted, the gameplay is drastically different than Cthulhu Wars, which is more of an area control, dudes on a map type game, and the Duel is, a duel. So it'll just be intriguing because I think it's a departure from what they put out there. So it's nice to see people have something a little bit different and to test the waters a little bit. So I give them kudos for being willing to do that. That's it. I don't know. That's a quick roundup. Hopefully something caught your eye. If not, tell me what has caught your eye, and we'll talk about it. A couple games I'm going to be talking about in the other late pledge manager I think have caught my eye or just of interest recently. Etherfields obviously is a big one, and then also Storm Sunder, the miniature campaign game in a similar nature. And I'll probably pick a few others, maybe 3, 4 others, just so it can round it out and have a nice discussion. So I'll also have a few other game reviews coming soon. After January hits, I'll put out my top games of 2020, my favorite games I played in 2020. There's going to be some overlap there, probably, but also some uniqueness there because I'm not always up with the hotness and I'm playing stuff a lot later than people. So there will be some divergence there as well. As always, see you later. Stay classy out there. Have a good night. Happy holidays. Merry Christmas. Happy Hanukkah.